there's a multiverse where the MCU never happened and Ben Affleck isn't Batman, he's Daredevil. But do you know what? It wasn't a multiverse, it happened. Take yourself back. I want you to join me and travel back 20 years in time before the MCU, when you only had Blade, X-Men, Blade 2 and X2. And other than the 70s stuff, and all right, Superman and Batman, you had them as well. But let's take a look at Daredevil, the movie, when a young, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Ben Affleck had a go at being a superhero. Bonjour. So 20 years ago, roughly, February 2003, 20th Century Fox release Daredevil. I would say onto an unsuspecting audience, but it wasn't really unsuspecting, because you'd had, up to this point, like I mentioned before, you'd had from the Marvel stable. Let's forget DC, let's forget Dark Horse, and let's forget The Crow for a moment, because we're going to come back to The Crow. And this was, I've revisited the movie, obviously, not to do this video actually, it's to do a video on Daredevil in totality with my old mate Space Lizard. But I watched the film and I thought, I've got to talk about this film in a little bit of detail as a moment in time. And it's almost like a film out of time, because in the early 2000s, you know, where X2 had come out, and then you was going to get Blade 3, and then, all right, I know you're going to get Elektra, but this is the land we're in. This is the landscape. You're going to get X-Men 3, The Last Stand. You're going to get Ghost Rider, written and directed by the same guy who did this, Mark Stephen Johnson. Yeah, I did have to write his name down. Because he hasn't really done a lot. He's not exactly prolific. So Mark Stephen Johnson helms this, and he helmed Ghost Rider. But let's just stick with this. What's weird about it is, well, straight off the bat, I'm going to say I enjoyed this movie for its glorious. It's unapologetic. It's unapologetically a comic book movie, which nowadays we have grown out of. When the MCU was doing the best, when they was doing their best work, which I am going to say, between Iron Man and Endgame, we moved beyond what Daredevil was doing, and all the other, and quite a few of all the other superhero movies were doing. But where I've been a long time fan of Daredevil, and I obviously watched this when it came out, it was a weird mash. And if you haven't seen it, it's a weird mash. There will be spoilers, but it's a weird mashup of, if you've seen the TV show now, yeah, it's got Josie's Bar. Yeah, it's got Karen Page in two scenes. This film has got Jon Favreau, think about it, I'll let the name sink in, as Foggy Nelson. And it's got Ben Affleck, who nowadays is Batman. I know he's done other things, but let's keep it superhero-y. As Matt Murdock. They changed, straight away, they changed the origin, which I found weird. Because in the comic, and like they do in the TV series, and I have got to compare it to different things, he's doing a noble thing by saving someone's life and then getting the acid spilled on him, or the biochemical hazardous material. In this film, it's just him running away. He's noticed that his dad is working for Fallon, you know, the mafia boss, and you know he's noticed that he's an enforcer and he's running away, and basically he causes his own he causes the accident, which I did find a bit jarring, I've got to say, because it doesn't make him righteous at all from the beginning. In this film, he also kills, and this is the uneven. It's uneven in that respect, because him, Matt and Foggy represent someone who's obviously, because he can hear the heartbeats. You know, I'm assuming you all know the shtick of Daredevil, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this. So he knows that he's the person on the stand is lying, but he gets off because he's been sorted out by the Kingpin. You know, paid off the judges, whatever, the witnesses. But he ends up throwing this, and it's quite a long kind of chase and actiony scene. And it was done well, to be honest. It's done well because it's down in the subway in New York, and a train comes rattling along, and he's, you know, it's showing you Daredevil's weakness. Which, all right, and but what I mean is they set up the weakness from the beginning of the film, and they used it throughout. These days they've used that same thing, which rewatching this film was quite amusing. They've used it for Venom, when he can't, you know, when it's the one thing he can't stand is his noise. And at the end of the film, which was a joke, the whole film anyway, and they're having a fight in a church, and all the the big organ tubes. Well, that was the same as the end of this film when he's fighting Bullseye, and Bullseye recognises his weakness and starts slamming the organ tubes, whatever they're called. Nevertheless, it was a well done scene, and 20 years ago, it's setting up the weakness for the character, which the Kingpin exploits at the end. But they've also shown you the way that he defeats the Kingpin that they've shown you at the beginning of the film. So, you know, it's well crafted. It's had some consideration and thought put to it. But I think in the creative process, a lot of people, the execs and the producers, would have said this is just a comic book movie. And I think they kind of stopped at a level, because I think if they just elevated it from just a tiny bit from what it sits at now, it would have been even better. And I tell you why I'm quite adamant that would have worked, is because that the theatrical release was elevated by the director's release, which was a bit more violent, but I think this character needs it. But what they sat back and did in 2003 is make this Marvel's Batman. And they went for a dark, gloomy, kind of almost gothic feel. And I know that there's this graphic novel, and Kevin Smith did a cameo in the film, by the way. And this predates the movie. This graphic novel, this series of comics, eight issues in Marvel Knights, was written by Kevin Smith when he weren't a knob. And it was a really good read. And it's all the stuff about him. It's all the angst in the church, and am I doing the right thing, and am I a daredevil, you know, when and it's about self-belief and etc, etc. And that was gothic. But I like Batman when it's gothic, but Daredevil was never Marvel's Batman. There was a time, maybe when I did kind of think that, because he hasn't got any, you know, where Batman isn't superhuman. You know, Daredevil, I know he's got his senses enhanced, but it doesn't really give him super strength. You know, he has still got to apply himself to gravity, so to speak. He isn't superhuman. He is a human being with heightened senses, which gives the, you know, Batman is an exceptionally trained and motivated human being, and Daredevil, perhaps that's why they're two of my favourite comic book characters. Maybe. But they made this film quite gothic with a full moon, and they did take stuff. They literally lifted pages from the comic book, this comic book in particular, but another one. There's only two that I'm going to use to illustrate as we move on. But yeah, it was too gothic. It was a Batman, but so he ends up, him and Foggy defend someone in court, and because he gets off scot-free and Matt's wound up, he tracks him down, goes down to the tube, you know, catches up with him, and there's a big, before this there's a big fight scene with guns and all that, and it was really staged. Looking back on it, it hasn't aged well, and they've just made things look cool for the sake of it. Like there's a point where there were 3 pool tables all lined up as they would be in a pool, you know, in a kind of pub club, you know, where all the bikers go, but they're all on fire for some reason. But they're all on fire just within the table, within each table, to enable him to jump down from one of the lights and walk through the fire and threaten the bloke he's going to kill in a minute, who got off scot-free. And so some of that is a little bit cringy, I've got to say. But there's a wholesomeness about the intention behind it that kind of makes me, and I suppose I am this, and perhaps I'm just, you know, perhaps I am just biased because I've loved the character from the beginning. That you know, I wasn't kind of holding the film to account too much, but at least I'm mentioning it now. They do a lot of that, just making it look cool, which I know Dismal Miners do now. Like, wouldn't it be cool if this would look great if? And this film is guilty of that. But anyway, he kills him by kind of sending him over the, or punching him, or he does something and he breaks his back on the edge of the subway platform and falls into the thingy, and he says, oh, that's not the light of heaven, and it's the A train. And he's dead. He kills him, just lets him die. So yeah, in effect, he has murdered this person. And at the end of this film, Kingpin, Michael Clark Duncan is Kingpin. He don't do a bad job. I could really go in depth with so much, but the physical presence that Michael Clark Duncan brings, I must admit, was impressive. How they did it as a glorified mafia boss is probably standard. But at the end of the film, he does not. He's got the opportunity to kill Kingpin and do him once and for all. He finds out in this film, Kingpin killed when he was working for Fallon, the mafia boss. Kingpin was just a henchman then, and he was the one that smashed Matt Murdock's dad's head in, you know, with his bare fist, smack, and leaves the rose. They've got this motif, and again, this goes back to the Batman bit where they do the whole death scene with Matt running to his dad in an alleyway with a rose, you know, just with a little motif of the death, and he's gripping the rose. I mean, it's not all nicely done, don't get me wrong, but it was very, very Batman-y. Is that even a word? I don't know. So that was one of the glaring, another jarring where he lets the guy die, and I thought, well, the standards that your dad brought you up to, he upholds at the end, and he's supposed to be upholding the law, and he's supposed to be punishing criminals, but he lets this man die underneath a train. You can't call that an accident. You can't call that an accident. But anyway, moving on from that. So it's dark. He's brooding, and he goes to sleep in a in a sensory deprivation tank. So it's going back to the gothic part of it. His apartment is, wow. It's like he lives in a gothic Egyptian kind of Roman mausoleum with this sensory deprivation tank in the middle where he goes to sleep. I get where they were going with it, because what they're trying to allude to in it is that this is the only way he can find peace. So as soon as that lid comes across the top of the sensory deprivation tank, and you just see his face like up to there in the black fluid, and it cuts all the sound off. The world is cut off. Which, it was all nice, again, all nicely executed, but and this is with the benefit of hindsight, to be fair. It just lends itself to a really dark anti-hero. With the gothic stuff and the full moons they have and all the rest of it. But from that, all that might be gothic, but other than that, for want of a better term, it is silly superhero stuff. It's silly superhero time. When he meets Elektra, played wonderfully by Jennifer Garner. I don't know how many films she'd done before then, but forgive me for being a white heterosexual male, but she looked absolutely beautiful in this. Absolutely stunning. And she did make a good Elektra. She looked athletic, and the fight scenes looked authentic. Although with modern eyes, you look back on these fight scenes and they're going, wha, he, ho, and you can see them doing the ha, he. It was almost like a little bit Matrixy, that first Matrix film where it's like they go, wha, he, ho, ha. And it's all a little bit more fluid now. But Elektra, there's no, the origin was that he knew her from, in the comics. And it didn't bother me because he knew her from his college days. But in this film, he's just meeting her cold, and they have this kind of fight where they're sizing each other up. And she's still mysterious and the daughter of a billionaire and all the rest of it. And it's her dad that's involved with Kingpin, and Kingpin kills her dad, and Bullseye comes in to do it. Kingpin's hired Bullseye. I've never liked Colin Farrell. I don't get it. I don't get it with that man. I don't get it with that actor. I'm sorry. He doesn't do it. You know, I'm not hating on him, and I'm not telling anyone else to hate on him. I just don't know why. His origin, if you want to search it out in British TV, where he started out from. I know we've all got to start somewhere, but I just don't get it. I don't get it. And I don't get why Bullseye is Irish in this film. I know Colin Farrell is, but they really do play it up. But I must admit they do with Elektra and Bullseye, and obviously Daredevil, the main character. They do at least mirror some of the comic stuff. And he's in at the beginning. At the beginning, the bookends to the movie is him hanging on to a crucifix on top of a church in New York, and I know that there's a lot of religious stuff in who'd have guessed? I couldn't find it anyway. It's this picture, and we will have a look. And you've just got to see how this compares to what they done, how they mirrored it, in the film. And when he, and again, spoiler alert, when he guts Bullseye, this is issue 181 of Daredevil, the Frank Miller run, and the TV show and this film take a ton of stuff. And the film took a ton of stuff from this comic. Bearing in mind the film was 2003 and this was 1982. This comic. This is when Frank Miller was in the 80s, when he was redefining Daredevil and he was redefining Batman. A lot of the Dark Knight Returns, which was in Dawn of Justice and all that. But you know, imagery like this scene. And all of these panels, like the lead up to it, the fight where Bullseye, like old Colin Farrell, he flicks a card, because obviously he can make anything. Yeah, I think we're familiar with a Bullseye anyway. I'm not going to explain that. He's well over the top, like so far over the top. And again, I'm going back to Batman, where Jack Nicholson was so over the top as the Joker, but that's Jack Nicholson. That is an Oscar-winning actor who knows what level of ham is required, and Colin Farrell clearly doesn't in this, because he's well beyond. I'm sure a lot of people enjoyed it. But no, I didn't. You got the bloke from the Matrix. You got the traitor bloke from the Matrix. I forget the actor's name. He's Ben Urich. So all their characters there. Karen Page is only in it for two scenes. Like I say, Jon Favreau as Foggy. These were the early days, guys. These were the early days. Stan Lee makes an appearance early on in the film. So all the kind of the DNA of Marvel is all there. But my feelings, like having rewatched the film recently, was it hasn't dated well, but I wasn't in. There was something about it I just enjoyed. It made me relax. There was nothing. It was kind of boy meet girl. You know, boy has tragedy. It was all the classic stuff. It was all. I don't know what. I don't know how many it is. Is it 9? There's only 9 versions of a story you can ever tell. Boy meets girl, and etc. etc. You know, the hero's journey and all that. I think it's 9. And this is one of them. You know, it's just the story of Matt overcoming adversity. You know, first the blindness, then his dad being killed. Then he meets the girl of his dreams. She's having the same problem. Her mum's already, you know, we find out later, you know, she's been killed. But, you know, she meets the man of her dreams, and then her dad get killed in front of her, as well as her mum has before. So, you know, it is mirroring. The two characters are mirroring each other, which I really did enjoy. And I know some people back in the day really did criticise the love story aspect of this. But I thought it was really nicely done when they're on a rooftop, Matt and Elektra. It might be the dialogue involved, but basically what he's saying is, the only way I can see you, he knows it's going to rain, and they're on this rooftop, and I thought it was quite romantic. Perhaps I'm just getting a little bit old and soft in my old age, because I know a lot of people really hated this scene. But they're burgeoning love. You know, this film, the heart of this film is Matt and Elektra's love, and I just like the way it was done. I just like the way it was done, because the payoff when Bullseye guts Elektra in those panels I just showed, how upset he is, and the rage that fuels his final attack on Kingpin, and then not killing him, it does resonate. I think the only thing wrong with that is seeing him let just some has been lower down criminal die. I think if he'd have maintained his stoicism, his, you know, his goody two shoes approach to everything, I think that would have resonated even more. Nevertheless, it still resonated. But other than that, I just thought I'd kind of air my. This isn't quite a review. It was just really weird collection of thoughts looking back on this film, comparing it now to the modern day content. And I mean the modern day. I'm not talking about Iron Man to Endgame. It doesn't stand up against any of them. Even the worst ones. They are better. They're better. You know, they're more skillfully crafted, and the special effects are better, and times have moved on. It is definitely better, and particularly with the Daredevil TV series. But with the modern product in this dismal minus era, like post Endgame, I watched that film for a couple of hours, you know, whatever it was, hour and 3/4. And I wasn't stressed out. I just relaxed into it, because there was something basic about it. Yeah, the stunts. Times moved on with the stunts and the way a superhero comic book. But is that now formula? Is that too formulaic now? Because this didn't adhere to the formula, that is kind of, we're browbeaten with it now. The formula of the superhero movie, because this was the early days of doing it. Like I say, this was Blade 1 and 2, X-Men 1 and 2, and then Daredevil ish. you know, give or take, give or take. Am I saying it's dated because it didn't adhere to those? But am I also saying, well, I didn't mind it. It was just a decent Daredevil film. Did it follow the comic? Well, it did mirror a lot of it. There was the one murder scene that was jarring. Did it spoil it? No. All the characters were there. I kind of missed the Karen Page element of it, but I can appreciate how within an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes film, you can't be developing the love triangle. Well, maybe you could. Maybe there is a screenwriter out there that could have really got on with it and developed that unrequited love with him and Karen Page, because that's what I was going for in this one scene. Like Matt comes in and is basically ignoring Karen, so it might have all been there in the screenplay. Now I'm saying it because Karen, it's really obvious she's on screen and her name is Karen, and she's saying, "Oh, this came for you in the post," and she's standing there kind of waiting for him to praise her or whatever it is, and there's Foggy there saying, "Oh, I want another." He's obviously clocking that she's all for Matt, and what can I do for you? 2 bags full, sir, for Matt. And whatever Foggy, he wants a cup of coffee, and she just wanders off with the ump and kind of ignores him. And old Favreau turns around to Affleck and says, "Oh, she's putting a pot of coffee on," like just to make an excuse for like her having the ump and not even listening to him. So maybe those scenes were there. I don't know. Maybe those scenes were there. The foggy Matt scenes are nicely done, particularly the scene where Elektra first turns up in the coffee shop, and there's a nice moment at the end of the film, obviously after Elektra's been murdered, where they're in the same coffee shop and the same bell goes above the door, but the camera falls on, it's another woman, but for a moment I think you're all expecting, oh my god, did she get away with it? And he goes to the rooftop at the end scene, and the necklace she's been wearing, there's a braille. So there was obviously setting up a sequel. There's the exact same necklace but with braille, and he finds it. It's hanging on one of the clotheslines on top of one of the tenement buildings of Hell's Kitchen. You can imagine if you haven't seen the film, which I thought was really, like I'm saying, I just found it really nice. But it's very, very basic. It's not a sophisticated film, but I did enjoy it nevertheless. Like I say, but I'm coming from a biased point of view. So, yeah, go and check it out. If anything, just as a little bit of a history lesson, you know, go way back in time. If you've rewatched, say, the first X-Men trilogy or the Blade trilogy, this is the age I'm talking about. An age undreamed of. If you'd have said to someone then, after because this film wasn't the best, it wasn't the biggest box office hit. It didn't flop, but it wasn't the biggest box office hit. It earned money. It did earn money, but it wasn't. If you said to people then, "Oh yeah, he's going to go on from this to do Batman," I don't think, you know, people would give you a slap round the head. And it's really weird that obviously Affleck was really invested in the whole comic book stuff. In this graphic novel from the late 1990s, he does the intro to this. He does the introduction to this because it's written by Kevin Smith, and he's friends with Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith has a cameo in this film, and a lot of the film is based on this storyline. So that's a nice little link, really. It's a nice little link through. But it just goes to show you the amount of time, from the time that he would have done this, you know, 5 years later he's doing the film. So, you know, he's been invested in the comic stuff for a while, as old Ben. And on that note, maybe this has intrigued you enough, like I say, to go back and watch it. But on that note, I am going to bid everyone adios.